Our gospel reading today is from the book of Luke. Now, as they went on their way, he entered a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks, so she came to him and asked, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her then to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. There is need for only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. The mountains of western North Carolina hold a special place in my heart. In fact, tomorrow, Mia and Bates and I will get on a plane and head that way for a week with family. And despite the much cooler temperatures and the fresh mountain air, we promised to come back after our vacation. But it was in that area, in those mountains, in 2005, that I was first introduced to something rather profound for me. You see, it was those years ago I was working at a Christian summer camp as a camp counselor, and it was orientation week. And during orientation week, I was introduced to an experience that I now know was the beginning of a deeply spiritual journey for me. You see, we were hiking up the mountain nearest camp, and once we neared the top and reached a clearing right next to one of the beautiful mountain overlooks, we stopped there, and I noticed in the clearing that there was a scattering of rocks and what looked like large sticks. And I wondered why we were stopping, but our group leader called us over. And as I came nearer, I realized that that scattering of rocks and sticks was actually an organized collection of rocks and sticks. That they had in fact been organized into what looked to me like a circular maze. I was confused. "It's a labyrinth," our group leader told us. And as we leaned in, he went on to describe more fully this ancient form of a prayer walk, a sort of individual spiritual pilgrimage with one way in and one way out. It wasn't a maze after all. And then a large open section in the middle. It's a way of centering ourselves, we were told, of focusing our minds, our thoughts on God. You see, we take in with us whatever we need to bring to God, and we leave behind the distractions and the worry of our day as we twist and turn our way through until we reach the center, where we stay for a while, focusing on God, who's at the center of our whole lives. The labyrinth is a form of centering prayer. It helps us clear away the clutter of daily life and help us to focus on God and carry that focus with us into the rest of the day. It remains for me still one of the most helpful and useful tools for focusing on God at my center and clearing away the other noise and clamor and all of life's distractions for a while, anyway. And oh, how easily we become distracted and lose focus, don't we? It could be said that distractions are the scourge of modern life. Our days and nights are full of gadgets that ping and buzz and beep their way into our attention, taking us away from whatever we intend to be doing. Distractions hurt productivity. In fact, research has been done by the University of California at Irvine that says that the typical office worker only gets 11 minutes of continuous work before their task is interrupted. Similar research shows that for most students, it's closer to 2 minutes. With smartphones reaching near ubiquity, the problem of tech-driven multitasking, juggling daily texts and tasks with email, text messages, social media, it's all coming to a head. Some of us even wear those devices on our wrists so they never stop. But there's a cost for all of this multitasking. Workers are becoming less productive, students and adults are performing less well on cognitive tests, and the time that it takes to re-immerse ourselves in the thing we were distracted away from is considerable, leading to even less productivity. Linda Stone is a technologist who's written on the subject and has said that the disease of the internet age is continuous partial attention. In fact, it's become such a problem that many large companies and corporations are spending a great deal of money trying to teach and train their employees something called the be here now principle, training them to be present, to be attentive, and to be engaged. So whether at work or at school, or even at home, these interruptions to our work or to our focus inhibit our ability to be here now. Yet, being busy and multitasking in our world today is something we talk about with great pride. We boast that I'm a good multitasker. In fact, we even use it in job interviews. Maybe you've been in one recently and heard the question, well, tell me about your ability to multitask, to juggle multiple things at the same time. After all, that's a valued trait in an employee, right? But rarely do we instead ask, tell me about a time when you were fully engaged in your work. What did that look like? Instead, we strive for multitasking perfection. We work on an assignment at home while we watch TV. We call our mom to check in while we cook dinner. We watch the kids or walk the dog as we check our email. We drive our cars and text, read, put on makeup, eat breakfast, or even shave, all of which I have seen happen on I-85 in downtown Atlanta. It's terrifying. But to see, if we aren't careful, our being distracted can have serious consequences. And somewhere along the lines of multitasking, I, as well as anyone else, can forget to be fully present and just focus. Some days I have to work really hard to be fully present with the present in the midst of just a busy day and a busy life. Jesus' visit in today's gospel text with Martha and Mary is at first glance an indictment of busyness. I mean, it's true, after all, that we all could strive to be less busy, and that typically the busier we are, the more counterproductive our distractions become, and the more of them there seem to be. But sometimes our being busy is good and helpful. Being busy isn't necessarily a bad thing, but we need to pay careful attention to what happens to our own focus the busier we become. And so you see in Luke's gospel, Jesus and his disciples are slowly making their way to Jerusalem. And when they get to a certain village, they are welcomed by Martha, and Martha offers Jesus hospitality. She does what is expected of a host, and particularly of a woman in that time and culture. So Martha prepares the house. She shows Jesus the guest bedroom. She puts cut flowers on the table by his bed. She whisks through the living room, rearranging furniture as she goes, dusting, fussing, and then disappears into the kitchen. She chops onions and carrots and peels potatoes, puts a roast in the oven, scours the cabinets for a suitable dessert. She gets to work. She gets busy. But meanwhile, Mary, her sister, is in the other room and is just sitting at Jesus' feet and just listening. So as you might expect, Martha becomes irritated. Not only is Mary not being helpful, but no one is helping her. And once she finally speaks up, instead of Jesus affirming her multitasking busyness, he rebukes her. Martha, Martha, you're worried and distracted by many things. There's need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part. Now, in case some of you don't have siblings, let me go ahead and tell you that why don't you just be more like your sister? It's not exactly what Martha was hoping to hear. But let's back up a bit to point out that Luke may be doing something different in this text than we notice at first glance. You see, in this story, certain boundaries are being crossed. The description we're given of Mary here subtly identifies her as a disciple. She is, after all, in the disciple's position, sitting at the teacher's feet. Sitting at the feet of a rabbi as a disciple was not, at that time, an expected or accepted place for a woman to be. So Mary, at least in Martha's mind, should have instead been helping her sister prepare the meal and serve their guest. But instead, Mary sits and listens to Jesus. Now, these 5 verses have caused a great deal of trouble over the course of time because there are a few problems that come from different readings or interpretations of this text. The first of which is that many interpret this story as a zero-sum game, that for Mary to win means that Martha then must lose. Caroline Lewis, a scholar, professor, and preacher, has this to say about this problem. You see, the danger of this story is its invitation to what is better, to pit one expression of belief, of discipleship, of service, of vocation against the other. So we are exceedingly skilled in such comparison, yet when we make these kinds of moves and assumptions, we rarely stop to think about what we then assume about Jesus. To favor Mary is to say Jesus discounts service, which, if you read the Gospel of Luke, makes no sense at all. To favor Martha would be to say service is all that matters. Clearly, both matter if you read the Gospel of Luke carefully. We need Martha's and Mary's. But more recently, other challenging interpretations of this story have been offered. Some suggest that this narrative reflects an effort within the early community to remove women from the active sphere of service in the church. So this interpretation leaves us with a story that mirrors the same tendency among some Christian churches today to restrict the role of women in ministry, especially in leadership positions. So let's be very clear. This story is not about woman versus woman or women versus men. This is a story about discipleship and about focus. If anything, this story, like many others, adds legitimacy to the observation that among Jesus' followers, the ways of Christian discipleship were and are open to both men and women fully. And the message from the story of Martha and Mary, then, is not an either-or message, but a both-and. You see, when Jesus praises Mary's having chosen the better part, he refers to her singular focus on Jesus himself. The one thing does not mean one form of devotion. It means one object of devotion. To be genuine, acts of discipleship, whether contemplative, active, or anything else, need to maintain such focus. Jesus' comment to Martha was pointing out the fact that her service strayed from attending to its rightful object of devotion, the Lord Jesus Christ. This story reminds me of another story, also from not recent times. See, I'm reminded of the story of Nicholas Herman. Nicholas was, in the mid-1600s, a French soldier who was injured in the war and decided to change his life and enter a monastery in Paris. He was assigned to work in the kitchen there, which he didn't particularly like or enjoy. But it was there among the pots and the pans, dealing with the monotony and the urgency of preparing daily bread, that he discovered the prayer of the ordinary, what he called the practice of the presence of God. Better known to us as Brother Lawrence, he shared his practice of simply talking with God throughout the day, with many who came to the monastery to receive spiritual counsel, not so much from the abbot, but from this kitchen helper. He explained that he resolved to make the love of God the end of all of his actions. Brother Lawrence's lifestyle of practicing the presence of God has been written into a book called The Practice of the Presence of God, made up of letters and conversations between Brother Lawrence and the book's author. In it, Brother Lawrence shares these words: Our sanctification does not depend upon changing what we do, but in doing for God's sake what we normally do for our own sake. It is sad to see how many people mistake the means for the end, addicting themselves to religious works which they perform very imperfectly because of their human or selfish motives. It was a great delusion to think that times of prayer ought to be different than other times. It is just as important to adhere to God by action in the time of action as by prayer in the time of prayer. As Christians, we will always wrestle with the tension between action and reflection, doing and being, of working and of listening. And when one begins to outweigh the other, we become worried and distracted, and our work becomes more about us than it does about Jesus, as Martha's work became more about her. When anxiety in well-doing becomes the measure of our hospitality, then we, the church, have forgotten the one whom we have gathered to serve. When we stop to sit at Jesus' feet, however, and listen to what Jesus has to say to us, we are strengthened for the work of the kingdom, the work that God has called us to do. It is our stopping and our listening that better prepares us for our going and our doing. So is it possible that this story of two sisters offers us an ongoing plea from the Lord to focus on Him, to give some prime time, some continuous, full attention? Even amid the hustle and bustle of fulfilling one's mission, Jesus seems to say there is still nothing more important than to live in the eternal now of one's relationship with God. Here, then, is a spirituality as easily practiced in the kitchen as in the study, at school or at play, while working or while looking for work. What matters is not so much what you are doing, but the attentiveness to God's presence and purpose in, with, and under all our varied activities and responsibilities. And so, yes, we live distracted lives. It's the world we live in. It's our culture. But what then must we do to refocus and find center? What can you do today or this week to focus and center yourself on God and connect the Martha and the Mary that's a part of all of us? Consider finding a few moments this week to sit in stillness and listen for God. Focus on your breathing or on the sounds of creation around you and give thanks for each. Take time this week to walk the labyrinth that's here at Wilshire. Did you know there's one in the columbarium, and whenever the church is open, it is open to you? Find a way to take time and walk the path to the center and to spend time in the presence of the God who is at the center of all of our lives. Find a way to pray in all things this week and to practice the presence of God no matter what's going on around you, so that our good works remain good and rightly focused. There is a beautiful prayer associated with Brother Lawrence that reminds me of this story when I hear it. Listen to these words now. O Lord of pots and pans and things, since I have no time to be a great saint by doing lovely things, or watching late with thee, or dreaming in the dawn light, or storming heaven's gates, make me a saint by getting meals and washing up the plates. Warm all the kitchen with thy love and light it with thy peace. Forgive me all my worrying and make my grumbling cease. Thou who didst love to give men food in room or by the sea, accept the service that I do it unto thee. O Lord of pots and pans and all other things, whatever we do this week, whether action or contemplation, may we do it all unto thee. Amen.